The road to Noigny was narrower than Ada remembered, almost completely choked by wild shrubs and a deep, unsettling silence. The sky hung low above, thick and heavy with harmattan dust. As her bus rattled its way into the village, memories hit her in sharp, vivid flashes: the sound of her mother's laughter, the rich scent of palm oil heating over coal, and that ancient, magnificent baobab tree that always stood guard behind their compound, like a sleeping god. She hadn't been back in 8 years, not since her mother had sent her away so abruptly after that strange night. The night Ada swore she heard voices whispering from somewhere deep beneath the earth. Now, arriving at her old home, she found the compound nearly swallowed by weeds. Her mother's hut sat in a heavy silence, a rusty padlock on the door swinging back and forth, like a pendulum marking forgotten time. Neighbors greeted her, their eyes filled with a sad understanding, their mouths full of too many questions she had no desire to answer. But the baobab tree, it still stood. It seemed even taller than before, older, and somehow hungrier. That night, she sat alone on the veranda, just listening. The air buzzed with the endless chirping of crickets and the rustle of unseen things in the dark. Then, it came. It was soft at first, like a cool breeze curling around the back of her neck. "Ada." She froze. The breath caught in her throat. "Ada, come." She turned sharply, her eyes fixed on the massive silhouette of the baobab against the dusty sky. The wind stilled. Everything went quiet except for the frantic thudding of her own heart. "No," she whispered to the darkness. "Not again." But the whispers didn't stop. They came every night after that, and with each passing night, they grew bolder, more insistent, and more familiar. It was like her mother's voice, but woven together with 1,000 others, all of them tugging at the very edges of her soul, pulling her toward the tree. One evening, after days of this relentless calling, she finally gathered what little courage she had left and stepped off the veranda. She walked toward the tree, her bare feet pressing into the cool earth. As she got closer, she felt it, a strange vibration under her feet. The ground beneath the baobab pulsed, a slow, steady rhythm, like a breath, like a heartbeat. Her eyes scanned the massive trunk, and that's when she saw it. Carved into the ancient bark, almost invisible under layers of time, was her name, Ada. She traced the letters with a trembling finger, and right beneath it, another line of words, fainter still, but clear enough to read in the moonlight. "The women always return." A cold dread mixed with a strange sense of belonging washed over her. She finally understood. This wasn't just a tree, it was a legacy, a calling, and it had been waiting for her. As the whispers rose again, no longer just her name but a chorus of ancient voices, she knew she wasn't just visiting home. She was answering a summons that had been echoing through her bloodline for generations. She had returned, just as they knew she would. The question was, what did they want from her? What was her purpose here, at the foot of this living, breathing ancestor? The night offered no answers, only more whispers, pulling her deeper into the mystery that was her own past. The rain hadn't stopped since the day Adaeze stepped foot into the abandoned family house. It was a constant, mournful whisper, seeping through the roof like the sighs of old spirits. It soaked the silence with stories that had never been told, and with each passing day, the house grew colder. It felt as if grief itself had seeped into the very walls, a permanent chill that clung to everything. Adaeze found herself spending most of her time in the library. It was her sanctuary, a room filled with dusty shelves of forgotten wisdom and her grandfather's old, leather-bound journals. In the corner, a locked wooden box set on a small table. She'd noticed it on the first day. It was unremarkable, except for one thing. It pulsed with a faint, almost imperceptible light whenever the storm outside grew louder. That evening, the rain hammered against the windows, and the wind howled like a wounded animal. The old lights in the library flickered once, twice, and then went out, plunging the room into near darkness. In the sudden silence, a sharp click echoed from the corner. Adaeze's eyes shot to the wooden box. It was open. She moved towards it cautiously, her heart beginning to pound in her chest. Inside, nestled on a bed of faded velvet, was a silver pendant. It was cold to the touch, and its surface was etched with strange, swirling symbols she didn't recognize. As her fingers brushed against the cool metal, the shadows in the room seemed to deepen, to stretch and writhe as if they were alive. And then, she heard it, a voice, a whisper carried on the wind, right beside her ear. "Adaeze, you're not the first." She spun around, her heart racing, a gasp catching in her throat. There was no one there, only the oppressive darkness, the rain, and a soft, ethereal humming that seemed to come from the walls themselves. It was a tune she knew intimately, her grandmother's lullaby, a melody from a childhood that felt a lifetime away. Her hand closed tightly around the pendant, its coldness a stark contrast to her own racing pulse. Suddenly, images flooded her mind, vivid and terrifying. She saw her grandfather, standing at the edge of a dark, imposing forest, his voice a low chant lost in the wind. She saw her mother, her face twisted in a silent scream, her eyes wide with a terror Adaeze couldn't comprehend. And then, a final, chilling vision, something buried deep in the earth beneath the house. Something writhing, something alive. Her breath hitched. She stumbled back, the visions fading, but the feeling of dread remaining, coiling in her stomach. The pendant in her hand now felt heavy, like an anchor pulling her down into a past she never knew. This wasn't just a haunting. The old house wasn't just filled with sad memories and forgotten ghosts. The past was alive, it was awake, and it was calling her back. It wanted her to uncover the secrets buried beneath the floorboards, the truths hidden within the cryptic symbols on the pendant. Adaeze looked around the dark library, at the silent, watching books and the shadows that danced in the corners. She knew, with a certainty that chilled her to the bone, that she couldn't leave. Not until she knew what happened here. Not until she answered the call. The next morning, Adaeze found herself standing right at the edge of the forest she'd seen in her visions. The trees were just as she remembered them, looming impossibly tall, their trunks twisted with age. Their bark was blackened, as if they had survived some ancient fire, yet they were still alive, pulsing, almost, whispering. She took a deep breath and stepped inside. Immediately, the pendant hanging around her neck grew warm against her skin. With each step deeper into the woods, the air thickened. It became heavy with the rich scent of damp earth and something else. Something metallic and sharp, like old blood. The silence was the most unsettling part. It was completely unnatural. There were no birds chirping, not even the sound of wind rustling through the leaves. The only sound was a low, constant hum that seemed to vibrate up from the ground, right through the soles of her feet. It felt like the slow, deep heartbeat of something ancient and vast sleeping beneath her. She must have walked for what felt like hours, though the light barely changed in the dense canopy above. Then, she found it. Half hidden beneath a thick blanket of gnarled roots and green moss was a circle of stones. Carved into their surfaces were strange, swirling symbols. It was a language her mind didn't recognize, but on some primal level, her blood seemed to remember. It felt like coming home to a place she'd never been. As she reached out to touch one of the cold stones, a voice spoke, clear as a bell, right behind her. "You finally came back." Adaeze spun around, her own heart now hammering in her chest. A boy stood there. He looked to be about her age, with startlingly pale eyes and clothes that seemed to belong to another century. There was something achingly familiar about his face, about the way he stood there, perfectly still. He offered a small, sad smile. "I was the last one to wear it," he said, nodding toward the now glowing pendant around her neck. "Before it consumed me, before she could form a question, before she could even ask his name, the forest itself seemed to react. The ground trembled violently, and the low hum intensified into a deafening roar. Shadows writhed and twisted around the stone circle, coalescing into monstrous shapes in the periphery of her vision. A torrent of memories, none of them her own, crashed into her mind. She saw terrifying images of ancient rituals, of sacrifices made under a blood-red moon, of lost children wandering into these same woods, never to be seen again. She saw a pact, a desperate bargain made by her ancestors generations and generations ago. The boy's pale eyes darkened, losing their hint of sadness and filling with something cold and urgent. "You still have time to choose, Adaeze," he said, his voice cutting through the chaos. "You can end it all right here, or you can finish what your bloodline started." All around them, the ancient trees groaned, their branches creaking like old bones. A powerful energy was building, crackling in the air, waiting for her decision. She knew, with a terrifying certainty, that whatever choice she made, something was about to awaken, and the forest would never be silent again. Adaeze stood frozen, her breath caught in her chest, the ghost boy's words echoing in the very marrow of her bones. The pendant at her neck pulsed, no longer just warm, but alive, beating in perfect sync with her own heart, like a second soul had taken root within her. End it, or finish it? The question hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Finally, a wind stirred, rustling through the ancient trees, and with it came whispers. Hundreds of them, all murmuring her name. Ancestors, victims, watchers, all eyes, seen and unseen, were fixed upon her. She looked at the boy, his spectral form flickering, shifting between solid and smoke, a fragile beacon in the encroaching gloom. "What happens if I end it?" she asked, her voice a mere tremor against the rising tide of whispers. "You break the cycle," he replied, his gaze unwavering, "but something will be taken in return. The forest doesn't forget or forgive." A shiver traced its way down her spine. The forest was more than just trees and soil. It was a conscious entity, and it demanded balance. "And if I finish it?" she pressed, needing to know the full weight of her options. "You inherit the power," he explained, his voice somber. "You control the forest, but you carry the burden forever." Tears welled in Adaeze's eyes, hot and threatening to spill. Was there peace in either path? Control at the cost of eternal servitude, or freedom at an unknown, but terrible price? The choice felt impossible, a cruel riddle with no right answer. Suddenly, the shadows around them surged to life, dark tendrils of pure night that lashed out, pulling the boy toward the center of the stone circle. He didn't fight, didn't even flinch, as if he had been expecting this. His voice rose, cutting through the storm that was now building around them, a maelstrom of wind and raw energy. "You are chosen because you feel everything," he called out to her. "That's your strength, not a weakness." His words struck a chord deep within her. All her life, her empathy, her sensitivity, had felt like a curse, a vulnerability. But now she saw it differently. The pendant burned against her chest, a searing heat that mirrored the fire of her resolve. The forest itself seemed to scream, a cacophony of groaning wood and howling wind. Taking a deep breath, Adaeze stepped into the circle. The moment her foot touched the sacred ground, the earth cracked beneath her, fissures spreading out like veins. "I won't carry this pain forward," she declared, her voice ringing with newfound certainty. "I choose to end it." With a cry that was part grief, part defiance, she drove the pendant into the central stone. The world dissolved into a blinding flash of white light. Then, an absolute, deafening silence. The trees stood still again, their branches like skeletal fingers against the pale sky. The whispers were gone. The boy was gone. The circle of stones, gone. Even the pendant had vanished, leaving only a faint warmth on her skin. All that remained was Adaeze, and a profound sense of calm she had never known, a quiet that settled deep in her soul. But peace always demands a price. She turned to leave the clearing, feeling lighter than she had in years, completely unaware of the intricate, swirling mark that was now burned into the skin of her back. The forest was quiet, but it was watching and waiting. Weeks had passed since Adaeze's ordeal. She was home, or at least, she was back in what was left of it. Her smiles returned, but they didn't quite reach her eyes. There was a new hollowness there, a vacant space behind her gaze, as if something precious, something sacred, had been carefully peeled away, leaving an empty shell. Everyone noticed the change. Her aunt, a woman of few words but deep intuition, said nothing directly. Instead, she took to lighting candles at odd hours, filling the small house with flickering light and the scent of melting wax, a silent prayer for a soul she couldn't fully understand. The pendant, the one she had lost in the forest, was gone for good. It never reappeared, a permanent offering to the ancient woods. But something else had taken its place. The mark on Adaeze's back, a sigil shaped like the spreading roots of an ancient tree, remained. It was no longer just a scar. It was alive. At night, especially when the moon hung full and heavy in the ink-black sky, it would pulse with a faint, rhythmic light, a silent heartbeat against her skin. It was a constant reminder of where she had been and what she had become. One evening, drawn by an impulse she couldn't name, Adaeze found herself walking along the edge of the forest. The trees stood like silent sentinels, their branches skeletal against the twilight. And then she heard it. It wasn't a voice this time. Not a whisper on the wind. It was a feeling, a deep, resonant hum that vibrated in her very bones. The trees seemed to lean in toward her, their leaves rustling a welcome. The air, thick with the scent of damp earth and pine, folded around her skin like a warm, familiar breath. The fear that had once consumed her was gone. In its place was something new. Recognition, a sense of belonging. Life in the village continued its gentle rhythm, and soon, a new face appeared. A young girl recently arrived, with quiet eyes and a lonely air about her. She was endlessly curious, her gaze often drifting towards the dark tree line, much like Adaeze's once had. From a distance, Adaeze watched her. She observed the girl's tentative steps, her mixture of fear and fascination, and she recognized the pattern. She was now the watcher, just as the forest had once watched her. It was then that she understood. The cycle hadn't ended with her escape. It had simply transformed, and in its transformation, so had she. She was no longer the haunted girl, the one who ran from the shadows of the past. She had evolved. She was now the watcher of the present, a silent guardian standing at the threshold between worlds. She had become the keeper of the delicate peace, the bridge between the living and the spirits that lingered in the ancient woods. The forest had not forgotten its pact, its sacrifice, or its chosen one. And now, Adaeze wouldn't forget either. She carried its memory on her skin and in her soul, a living testament to the world hidden just beyond the veil. This story was inspired by a piece from Chronicles. If you were captivated by Adaeze's journey, make sure to like, share, and subscribe to their channel for more incredible myths and modern folklore. Thanks for watching.